So my mom left the picture when I was 3. She literally packed up one day and just walked out of my life. So for a long time, it was just my dad and I. I'm a male, and at the time my dad met Tammy, I was 13. I was chubby and at the time small for my age. I still had my baby fat. I was and still am a nerd. So was my dad, and we shared a love for Star Wars, comic books, and science fiction. My dad decided he needed to meet someone. He was lonely, and I thought it would be nice to have a mother figure. This was before online dating, and there was still personals in the paper. My dad filled out an ad, and it wasn't long before he met Tammy. I remember him telling me about her and how happy he looked. They dated for a month before my dad figured it was getting serious, and he wanted to introduce me to her. So my dad decided to take us out for dinner and a movie. I remember my grandma helping me get dressed, and I was super nervous to meet her. She seemed nice at first, but even at that age I could sense something was just off. We went to Sizzler's for dinner, and my dad told me to order whatever I liked. Then he excused himself to the bathroom. I smiled at Tammy and went to say something, and she cuts me off, telling me my dad's been letting me eat whatever I wanted, and that I'm a fat little piggy. She demonstrated this by actually fucking making pig noises. I was crushed. I mean, honestly, I wasn't very heavy, maybe a little chubby, but not obese like some children are today. My dad actually didn't let me eat whatever I wanted. But anyways, back to the story. She ignored me until my dad came back, and then played nice. I, for my dad's sake, faked being nice to her. I wanted to tell my dad what she said, but I didn't want to disappoint him or upset him. My dad and I were best friends, so I hoped and prayed my dad would realize what a bitch she was and come to his senses. But sadly, he never did. They dated steadily, and when I was 15, Tammy moved in. Now, that summer I finally lost my fat and grew a good foot or two in height. My dad is 6'3", so it wasn't surprising that I shot up to almost 6 feet by the age of 15. Puberty kicked in too, so my voice was doing that weird crackling thing. I made it a point to avoid Tammy. I went to school, came home, and stayed in my room and did my homework, and waited for my dad to get home. However, she started in on me most days as soon as I walked in. She would always find something. I was a loser, I was stupid, etc. Just cruel, mean things. A few times I told my dad, and he just insisted that we all needed to adjust, so I decided to just put up with her for the next 3 years for my dad's sake, and then I was out of there. The next 3 years sucked. Her insults got meaner. She would also do things like put glass and pieces of paper or sand in my food. I started refusing to eat her food and was terrified that she would poison me. It was around this time my dad and her got married. Graduation came, and I was set to enlist in the army. I planned on being in basic by July, but of course, she tried to ruin that. My recruiter received a call from someone claiming that I smoked pot. Thankfully, I passed my drug test, but I know it was her. One night before I left for boot camp, my dad had a huge party for me. She had tried to cancel it earlier, saying that she was sick, but by that point my dad had already invited most of my family and friends and wasn't going to cancel. She sat in the corner and pouted the entire time. I started to see that my dad was kind of beginning to realize her facade. Let's skip a few more years, and I get a leave. I have been deployed twice now and hadn't seen my dad in 22 months, so I was dying to see him. He had told me in previous conversations that their marriage was pretty much over. She was not only controlling and verbally abusive, but a few weeks prior, she had knocked my dad out with a cast iron skillet, and he had given her an ultimatum. She had a month to get out, or he was throwing her crap out. The night I got in, it was late. My dad picked me up and we came home. Tammy was gone. Supposedly she had started moving her crap into her sister's and was pretty much staying there most nights. So Dad and I ate and went to bed. Around 1 a.m., I feel my bed move. I'm exhausted, and I figure it's my dad's dog Caesar, who's a German Shepherd. That's when I feel hands go around my neck, and my soldier instincts kick in. I flip the intruder over and subdue them. My dad runs in and flips the light on, with his gun in hand. Well, you guessed it, it was my stepmonster. Dad calls the police, files a restraining order, and serves her with divorce papers. A lot more shit happens, such as her destroying my dad's new Mercedes, but I won't bore you with the details. What matters is that they're now divorced, and I've never seen that bitch again.
Number 2.
My mother's first husband, Jim, was an asshole. I was about 10 when they met at church. She was the new-in-town single mom, and he was the boyishly handsome drummer for the worship band, and they struck up a relationship. He wasn't what I would call her type, but I think she liked him because he was a sweet, laid-back, good old boy. He had a steady job, he was good at fixing things, and he at least made the effort to have a relationship with me. On top of that, he was born and raised in the town we lived in, was a friend or family with just about everyone. All in all, he was damn good husband material. Then came the troubles. You see, Jim was an alcoholic. When he started courting my mom, the drinking wasn't an issue. He had been upfront about his status, but he didn't make a habit of drinking, at least when we were around, and made it clear that it wasn't a part of his life anymore. All that changed after the wedding. Apparently, the stresses of married life were simply too much for him to bear. I've met many alcoholics in my life, most of them related to me, and it's a special sort of dread that washes over you as a child when you suddenly realize you're stuck with another one. I know alcoholics are not inherently bad people, but Jim was a lousy alcoholic. This easygoing guy would turn into a raging asshole just after a few PBRs. And when he decided to drink, he made an event of it. Usually he would storm out of the house after an argument with my mom and tear off into the night, not to be heard from again for days. He would eventually be discovered on the other side of town at his mom's house, half naked and trashed by the fish pond, working his way through a cheap case of beer and riding into town on a lawnmower for more. Upon his return, he would be the picture of remorse. He called himself scum and begged forgiveness, not just with us, but with the good Lord above. That was the thing that always bothered me about Jim. If we were having a family meeting specifically to discuss his behavior, he would insist in leading a prayer first. Every time he needed to explain himself, he mentioned conversing with God on the matter beforehand. To him, God wasn't a savior, or a beacon of hope, or even a crutch. To him, God was a defense attorney. No matter what kind of shit Jim got himself into, God would be on his side to pull him out. More than that though, and this is what I truly believe, he only seemed to talk about God's mercy and forgiveness, when in reality, he needed that from my mother and I, as if bringing up Jesus would soften our hearts to his struggle, as if suddenly we would remember we were Christians, and good Christians don't stay mad at their husbands. That strategy worked for a while, but the novelty wore off soon enough. He went to AA meetings now and then, and he would come home insisting that he was enlightened, reborn, and on the road to being clean, but never attended frequently enough to get results. The marriage lasted 7 tense years, punctured with stress-induced benders every few months, followed by more empty promises. My mom tried to play the role of supportive Christian wife for as long as she could, before finally giving up and switching to full-on resentment. The fights were never physical, but they were ugly, and sometimes they got loud enough that I was worried someone would throw a punch. Finally, my mother ended things with him. The divorce was quick and quiet, and by then I think they had just grown tired of each other and were relieved to part ways. She took the house, he took the Chevy Trailblazer, and that was it. My mom recovered nearly overnight and was happy to move on with her life. A few months after the divorce, we heard Jim had gotten remarried. Cindy was a friend of ours from church, and we had been close for years. Though it was no secret to anyone that she always had a crush on Jim, Cindy had never been married before, barely even dated, and she had just landed her dream guy. We couldn't have been happier for her. For Jim's part, my mother and I decided to be optimistic. Maybe he really had cleaned up his act if he could hook up with such a good, sweet woman as Cindy. A few years passed. I'm well into college by this point, and my mom is living with her new man in a different city. It's been at least a year since we've been back to our small town, or even spoken to anyone there. One day I get a message from a high school friend. "Did you hear about Jim?" I asked her to go on, already rolling my eyes as to what it could be. As she started to tell me what happened, my smugness turned into horror. Jim and Cindy had been having problems for a while, reportedly over money, and I can guess a few other things. The incident started when Cindy went to Jim's trailer. Apparently she had recently moved out and was returning to pick up some things. Cindy's 22-year-old niece was with her. Jim had claimed he was going to rehab, so they were surprised to walk in and see him sitting there, drinking on the couch. The couple began arguing, leading to the woman leaving the house and driving away. Drunk and furious, Jim jumped into his truck and took off after them at full speed. He caught up to them and slammed into Cindy's car, knocking it so hard that it flipped and rolled off the road. Realizing what he had done, Jim backed away and sped off in the other direction to hide. Cindy was in critical condition for days before she was finally declared stable. Her niece had died on impact. Jim was found hiding out in some farmland a few hours after the incident and was swiftly charged with murder, DUI, and fleeing the scene, among other things. The city's golden boy had just sunk himself into a whole lot of shit, and not even his lawyer, Jesus Christ, could get him out of this one. This story is awful and upsetting for a lot of reasons, not the least of which being two innocent women were so viciously attacked by this drunk idiot, and that they all happened to be people I knew. But the one thing that still chills me is the car Cindy was driving was a Chevy Trailblazer, the very same Chevy Trailblazer that Jim got in the divorce, my mom's old vehicle, the car that I learned how to drive in. I can only imagine how fast he was going to hit them hard enough to flip it with his little pickup truck. How angry he must have been to not even hesitate. And I do wonder how many times my mother and I escaped a similar fate. If you guys are interested, a link to the newspaper article describing the accident can be found in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, never forget.
There's always a reason to be afraid.